Hey everybody, it's Jason Blah here. Now that my two obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. And a lot of times in this segment, I'll do videos where I'm critical of people. I make fun of them, I troll people, I talk smack. In this case, I think Jeff Nippard did a pretty good video, and I occasionally even talk smack about Jeff, but 90% of what he does is actually pretty good. It's pretty good, and I felt this video falls in that category. A couple minor caveats. But basically, Jeff made a video making fun of his April Fool's, kind of clarifying points on his April Fool's video, which he trolled a lot of people. Which, fair enough, April Fool's, right? Fair play to him. And anyone who saw that should have known, since he put it out on April Fool's Day, that it was an April Fool's joke. I don't know why anybody was confused about that. You should have looked at the date. I did, because I saw it. And it was apparent before you got 10 seconds into the video what it was. But that aside, he made a video talking about building muscle. Now, one thing I do want to clarify, he did kind of throw the word health and fitness, those two words with bodybuilding, in the same sentence. That's a no-no. Not allowed. Bodybuilding is completely unhealthy. Not fitness related in any way. And I always want to remind people of that. You can't be a bodybuilder and still care about your health. It's completely incompatible. And that includes even natural bodybuilding, because you have to diet down to emaciated levels of body fat that compromises your hormones, can compromise your mental health, everything else. It's unhealthy, right? It's unhealthy. That aside, most of us who are lifting, we're trying to gain muscle. Almost everyone who is in the gym lifting, we're trying to gain muscle for very obvious reasons. Maybe to speed up your metabolic rate to help you lose fat, improve your quality of life, improve your lifts as a strength athlete, improve your golf swing, right? There's a hell of a lot of reasons to gain muscle. And it's a real good idea. It's a real good idea, particularly for people who want to be healthier as you get older. Reversing sarcopenia, critical for long-term health. We should all be trying to gain muscle. So it's a valid topic for pretty much everybody. It's a valid topic for everybody, not just bodybuilders. Definitely not just bodybuilders. It's important to everybody. So I think it's something we should understand. He raised some points saying, hey, we need to understand that we know that volume is largely related to workload and muscle growth. That volume seems to be the primary or one of the primary drivers of muscle growth. A lot of times we'll count volume as weight times rep. What do I always say? That distance moved is also a factor. He addressed that, and I like the fact that Jeff actually addressed that. I'm going to give props for that, because that's something I've said many, many times. In other words, if you're doing quarter reps, they count as quarter reps. If you're doing a fourth of the range of motion, you didn't do 20 reps. You probably did 5 reps. You did 5 reps realistically, because the distance moved matters. And when you look at the data, reducing the range of motion on an exercise purely for the purpose of increasing the weight doesn't improve hypertrophy. It usually reduces it, right? When studies have looked at it, if you do half squats or half benches or half leg extensions, but you can do a heavier weight, it actually still reduces the muscle growth. You get less gains from it when they measure it over time. So again, the point needs to be driven home. I like that he addressed that. But he got into this whole point, though, of distance move and work done, if you're using bad technique, can be compromised. That when technique isn't consistent, and I think that's the best way to look at it. Again, a point I've made before, I agree with it completely. Consistent technique is the only way that you can track tension and workload. That's the only way that you're improving. In other words, if your technique changes on an exercise, your technique changes, the bar path changes, that can affect the amount of weight you're lifting. It can involve which muscles are involved. You have no way to really track your progress. And we know that progressive overload is any way that you break it down, progressive overload, whether you're talking about progressive tension, whether you're talking about progressive volume, progressive workload, it's the primary driver of your gains. It is, any way you break it down. So if you can't ensure that you're progressing, then you don't know that you're actually stimulating growth. And if your form is getting sloppier and sloppier, but it's allowing you to lift more weight or do more reps, it's probably not doing anything for your muscle growth. We need consistent technique. Now, what he also pointed out, and I like, is that people on the other end of the equation can go too far, and there are actually people out here on YouTube I've accused Athlean X of doing that with people, of holding their progressive overload back because he wants to see this perfect form or to build up any whatever weaknesses he sees before he allows them to progress, and that also will cause you to stagnate and spin your wheels for long periods of time. That there is a balance to be had between making sure that you have good form, right, so that your form's not breaking down so that you can lift more weight, versus trying to obsess over form so much that you never progress. The latter is actually probably, in my opinion, worse, because you're never going to make progress, right? And if we're not making progress, if we are stagnating, we're basically regressing. We're wasting time, right? Sink or swim. So, fantastic points that he raised. So he kind of got to the question of how heavy is heavy enough. He pointed at a lot of the studies, and I actually have a problem with a lot of these studies. And it was pointed out there are studies showing that very, very high reps with very light weight do seem to stimulate the same hypertrophy as heavier weights. I'm going to disagree with that. Now, a lot of people are going to say, what? The studies are there. And that's not what the studies show. The studies usually show things like these 30% intensity sets seem to produce the same short-term metabolites in the bloodstream. We see a similar hormonal response. We see a similar metabolite response to more moderate weights. And even if they do studies that look at a little bit of short-term hypertrophy, does anyone ever gain much muscle in 4 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks? I have never seen one study that would confirm that working with 30 to 40% intensity to failure, so it's going to be like 30 or 40 or 50 reps, produces over the course of 6 months, produces the same hypertrophy that 3 reps do, that 8 reps, that 10 rep sets. I've never seen credible evidence of that. Everything is short-term, and it's usually metabolite studies. I don't think that's real evidence. That indicative that it might have the potential, right? It's indicative that it could be. But there's a difference between saying, hey, it might have the potential, and actually measuring and showing the potential plotted over time. The latter's not been done to my knowledge. So I don't necessarily buy into it. But he did point out that the data is showing that it does seem to need to be at least 30% of your max. So in other words, you can't curl the 2-pound dumbbells for 100 rep sets and realistically expect to gain muscle. And I would agree with that. And he said that from a practical perspective, he would recommend to most people that maybe the 6 to 12, if they needed to narrow it down to 1 rep range. And I don't believe in narrowing it down to 1 rep range. Even though I train most of my work in the 1 to 3 myself, I still do 10 rep sets. I still do 20 rep sets, right? And I care about strength foremost. I wouldn't really recommend you narrow it down, but if you did, I usually say like 5 to 8. So pretty close to what he says, but I would say the same thing, that if you, for whatever reason, have stuck in your head that you want to work in 1 rep range for a very, very long period of time, I think the 5 to 8 is usually what I would say, because again, it's not that heavy. Because if you can lift a weight 5 times, it's not heavy. I don't give a shit how much weight is on the bar. If you can do it for at least 5 clean reps, it's not a heavy weight. But it's not really high rep either when you go up to 8. So the 5 to 8, I feel that people can sustain progress longer on that. And I feel like the higher reps go, the faster you stall out in terms of progress, which is one of the benefits to rotating heavier sessions in. There's a lot of benefit in terms of training and everything. But it's outside of novice lifters, I would never recommend anyone train just 1 rep range for extended periods of time anyways. I just wouldn't recommend it. I don't know why you would do it. So I think it's kind of bad advice to do it. Some people choose to do it, and I've said if you want to do it, you could do slow linear progression in the 5 to 8 outside the novice phase. It's workable. It can work, but it's not going to be ideal. It would never be ideal. And I think Jeff largely agrees with that. He periodizes his training also, so he understands that himself. So I don't think he was really trying to push that idea. Another point that he brought up, and he talked about the eccentric reps, and I think we'll agree and disagree. I will agree when he said that an eccentric rep should only be 1 or 2 seconds. It should be controlled, but it should only be 1 or 2 seconds. That I would agree with. If we're going to talk about a practical perspective, I think for practical purposes, if you're trying to maximize muscle growth, 1 to 2 second, somewhat controlled eccentric reps are probably the way to go. Now, where I'm going to disagree with him is the idea that eccentric reps have more hypertrophic potential. I don't think they do. I think concentric reps are more important for muscle growth. I know that's a source of major contention in the literature, but it has to do with muscle fiber recruitment. And he points out, well, you're stronger on the eccentric rep. Right, you're stronger, and therefore it's because it's easier. It's easier to lower a weight than it is to lift a weight, to lower a weight under control. Therefore, less muscle fibers are involved. That's why you're stronger, because it's not as much work. So if we come back over to this point of workload, concentric reps have more potential for workload. They have more potential for workload per rep done. And we come back over to tempo. You might argue, well, a fairly slow controlled concentric rep might equal the eccentric rep in terms of muscle fiber recruitment. But what happens when you lift it explosively? We know based upon every study that's ever looked at it, explosive, fast, but controlled lifting has a higher threshold of muscle fiber activation. It recruits more muscle fibers, right? You should be lifting explosively on the concentric reps. I think the concentric, when done explosively, has more hypertrophic potential. I just do, based upon all of that. Plus, there are even programs out there for certain types of lifters that are concentric-based programs that people bulk up on just fine. So I don't think the eccentric is super critical. But let's come back over to practical. It's kind of like a lot of what he said in the video. It's not practical to do 20 and 30 rep sets of squats to failure, and I would agree with that. That's one reason I would say those big lifts, you need to do mostly just low reps, right? Save your accessory movements, your smaller movements for the higher rep, higher volume stuff. These big exercises, you're better off lifting heavy and just doing more sets and avoiding muscle failure on big lifts. Big lifts, what I mean, squats, deadlifts, bench press, overhead press, weighted chins, stuff like that. Your big lifts, you probably really need to lift pretty heavy so that you can avoid going to failure in order to maximize muscle growth and do more sets, right? And if you need more volume because you can only recover from so many sets of your big lifts, that's where the smaller exercises come in. You can do those with more moderate weights, higher reps, even up to 20, and target the areas that need a little bit more training volume, right? And I think that's the best approach. And I don't agree that lifting heavy has a higher injury risk. No, I don't think doing singles on squats has a particularly high risk if you're training correctly, you know what you're doing, you have your technique reasonable, and you understand fatigue management. I don't think it's dangerous at all. I don't think it's even remotely dangerous. I think driving to the gym is more dangerous than doing heavy squat singles is. And that's how I feel about it. I think you're more likely to be hurt driving to the gym unless you don't understand fatigue management and training, right? So I'm going to disagree with that. But we come over to the point of practicality. I would agree it's practical to do your eccentric reps, right? It's practical to have a controlled eccentric. You're going to get out of the gym quicker. If you're trying to induce hypertrophy, you can do less total sets if you actually include an eccentric rep. It just makes sense to do it. But again, I'll agree with Jeff. The data I've seen done over the years shows that a slow eccentric doesn't cause any more muscle growth than a fairly fast controlled eccentric. In other words, a 1 to 2 second eccentric seems to maximize all the hypertrophy you're going to get out of an eccentric rep. Time under tension and all this stuff that people come up with is bullshit. It's not based in reality. It's a goofball bodybuilding theory. Not based on reality, not based on science, not based on evidence. So I would agree with Jeff, though, that a nice controlled eccentric will let you do fewer total reps to get the same amount of work done with a given amount of weight. It'll let you cut down the number of sets, because if you're just, say, doing pin leg rows and turning loose at the top, right? Deadlifts turning loose at the top, you're going to have to do more total reps. You're going to have to do more total sets to get the same amount of muscle fiber recruitment, so you're going to spend more time. It's just better efficiency to go ahead and do a controlled eccentric, even if the eccentric doesn't have a superior hypertrophic effect, which I believe is the case. I don't believe that it does. But it makes sense. It's just practical. It's practical. There's usually, for most of you, unless you have a sport-specific reason, there's no reason to completely skip your eccentric rep, right? There's no reason to do so. So if there's no reason on a lot of these exercises, again, unless you have a specific reason, and there can be performance reasons, there can be sport-specific reasons, it's probably not a big deal to just go ahead and do the eccentric rep, right? Get out of the gym a little quicker, do a few less reps. So I'm not going to disagree with it from a practical perspective. But all in all, outside of those minor caveats, the thing about throwing bodybuilding and health together, which is a big no-no for me, It's saying that he feels that the eccentric rep has more hypertrophic potential. I don't think that it does. I don't think there's any reason to think that it does. And maybe that there's real evidence that the ultra high reps can produce as much muscle growth. There's evidence that's indicative of it, but it's certainly not been shown to actually be the case. And I think that's the big difference for any sort of meaningful period of time. And I would be reluctant to believe that that would be the case. In other words, I don't think that you're going to have some guy do 30% intensity sets to failure for a year straight and maximize his muscle growth. It's just, I don't think that's going to happen. And I would love to see evidence to the contrary. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.